Hey, comic fans, thank you so much for joining us. I know you thought I wasn't coming back, but Dave here at Ground Zero, still talking all things comics and all things comics history in a segment we're still calling Interestingly Enough. Now, today's topic was actually suggested several weeks ago by Jerry Hunter, who wrote in and said, "Can you talk about Planetary and the influences that Warren Ellis used to craft the story?" Well, Jerry, thank you so much for writing in. We really appreciate you watching. Absolutely. Now, it's taken me a while to get to this one because I didn't have the back issues to use to illustrate the story. But unlucky for us, and yet kind of lucky for you guys, we had 109 long boxes of books. That's 32,000 unsorted, randomized back issues, and we've spent our pandemic shutdown time going over all of that. So now we're good to go. Now, for this particular segment, I also want to give a shout out to a group of friends I belong to called the Graphic Fiction Appreciation Society. Now this group would get together in pre-pandemic times, the more idyllic times at Ground Zero, twice a month and really dissect a graphic novel. And we can't wait to get back together again to do just that. And this is the kind of work that we would do. So for TJ, for Josh, Kevin, of course, Michael and Victoria, and anyone else who came to that group, this segment is also for you guys because this is exactly what we would be doing if we weren't having to social distance right now. Now, actually, I love Planetary. It is one of my favorite works from that era. And to tell its story, we've got to start with one of my favorite writers, Warren Ellis. Now, born in Essex, he was still working in Great Britain in the 90s, but he was doing some work for Marvel Comics. Started off with some short stints on things like Doom 2099 and Excalibur, and then a pretty tasty little run on Thor with Mike Diodato. These are some good books, but his style hadn't really fully formed yet at that point. It was when he moved over to Image that he started to really solidify a style that would become very popular. On books like DV8, and in particular Stormwatch, these were very definitely revisionist superhero works, and this was a style that would make him very popular as the decade progressed. Now, 1997, that's when his star really began to rise, and it did so with this book in particular, Transmetropolitan. Now, Transmetropolitan is a dark, black-humored, future shock kind of book that's really, really good. If you haven't read this book, put it on your list right now. Now, that was getting him noticed, and his star was rising, and it would continue to rise and really start to peak when we hit 1999 for two books in particular. The first, Stormwatch, morphed into another group that they renamed The Authority. And this particular work with artist Brian Hitch was an instant classic. And if you're into revisionist superheroes, you've already read this book. But it was the other book, one that took place in the same universe as The Authority and Stormwatch, one that utilized a lot of the same concepts, but was just enough different that it in particular would go on to be regarded as one of his all-time greatest works. Now, to get to that, I'm actually going to skip back just a couple of years, where we find future artist John Cassaday at the San Diego Comic-Con. Now, he's there with attendees just like everybody else, but where everybody else is there to seek out back issues or hunt down autographs or meet celebrities, he's there for a little bit more serious professional reasons. And he comes across the table of DC writer and editor Mark Waid, and he shows him his art. Well, Wade's fairly impressed. He's impressed enough that he gives Cassaday some contacts. And so before long, Cassaday has quit his construction job in Texas, packed up, and moved to New York because he's going to become a comic book artist. Now, he gets there and fairly quickly gets a decent amount of spot work. Things like Flash Annual, Teen Titans Annual, one-offs, but still showing off his style. That led to a gig that would actually be kind of important to him, and that was this book, Desperados. With writer Jeff Marriott, this was a Western book, certainly unique at the time. Most people don't remember it all that well today, but it's very key because this is what brought him to the attention of Wildstorm editor Scott Dunbier. Now, Scott Dunbier liked his art, and he was going to place him on a book that was going to be very important. In fact, John Cassaday was sure this is the book that would make him a star, would really solidify his name in the comic industry. And that book, as you probably have guessed, was Wildcats. Okay, maybe that's not the book you guessed, but it was Wildcats that he hoped would make him actually something of a star. Well, if you're thinking, I've read every possible issue of Wildcats, I don't remember John Cassaday doing this book, it's because he didn't. At the last minute, Jim Lee stepped in and decided he wanted a somewhat bigger name than the, at this point, still best described as rising star Cassaday, so he went with Canadian artist Travis Charest. Now, Travis Charest does amazing work. It is beautiful. And this was a relaunch with Scott Lobdell, so they had a lot tied up in this book. But now, as beautiful and as meticulous as Travis Charest is, he's not known for being fast. In fact, he's not even known for being whatever 3 or 4 notches below fast is. In fact, if you go all the way on the fast scale to the very, very bottom, you will find a category just called Travis Charest, because he's really, really slow. In fact, he only did 4 of the first 6 issues of the book, and they had to basically boot him off the title. He was that slow. But they are great, so they're really, really beautiful. Just not plentiful. Now, Cassaday was disappointed, understandably so. But sometimes fate works out just about right, because Scott Dunbier actually had a proposal that had just come across his desk, and he agreed to fax it over to Cassaday. And fax machines, if you need to look them up, they're kind of like text messaging, but just using land phone lines and a lot of paper. Either way, it was a 90s thing. So he faxes him this proposal for a new series Warren Ellis has proposed called Planetary, in which he says there are mad and beautiful things beneath the skin of the world we know that you only see when you look at things on a planetary scale. End quote. Now, he proposed this series that would take place in the Wildstorm universe, the same universe as Stormwatch, as Wildcats, as the Authority, and it would use a lot of the same concepts, but it was going to be different. Now, what Ellis said was, what if? It was a lot of what ifs. What if underneath all of that existed in the Wildstorm universe, that there was an entire classic old superhero world? What if there were huge Jack Kirby temples built underground by old gods? What if there were ghostly cowboys still riding for vengeance? What if there were laughing killers locked away in Lovecraftian asylums? What if there was 100 years of superhero history leaking into the modern superhero world? Because this was going to premiere in 1999. They had a millennium that they had to basically encapsulate. Well, it took Cassaday all of 30 minutes to get back to Scott Dunbier and say, I'm in. I want to do this book. And so they got together and got work right away. So, September of 1998, the world gets its first look at Planetary in 2 Image books, Gen 13 and C23. It's actually done as a flip book, and this is the world's first look at this new team. Now, 7 months later, we get the first issue, and Planetary 1 really gives us a lot bigger glimpse into what we're going to be going along with. Now, what is Planetary? They are archaeologists of the future. It's a 3-person team that goes around investigating strange phenomena. When really weird stuff happens, they come in and try to figure out just what is going on behind it. Just like Scooby-Doo. Yes, think Scooby-Doo, just with superheroes and Daphne in a cat suit, and she can also break a tank in half. Other than that, it's just like Scooby-Doo. So this was a pretty good concept. Now, what about that 100 years of superhero history? Well, the 90s was very much a time of revisionism. It was a time of reboots, a time of revamps and reinventions. But usually what companies would do is they would keep all of the superficial aspects of a character and then do something with what was underneath it. They would take a character like Green Lantern. They would replace Hal Jordan with Kyle Rayner, and but they'd keep the power ring, they'd keep the origin, they'd keep the powers, all of the things that they felt were what made the character identifiable to its readers. Or in their Elseworlds line, they would completely change the setting, but you'd still have Batman in cape and cowl, because without the cape and cowl, of course, he's not Batman, or at least so the company thought. Ellis, on the other hand, thought differently, and he turned this concept on its ear. And so what he did was he took a lot of classic, iconic characters, and he stripped all the superficial aspects away, usually including the name. And so what you were left with was the essence of what made that character important, what made them mythological, what made them important in pulp history. And so this left us to keep characters like Tarzan, Doc Savage, Godzilla, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, all amazing parts of the American pop psyche, were all there now as part of this Wildstorm universe for Planetary to excavate. Now, if this sounds a little familiar, it's because there was another series right about this same time that explored somewhat similar territory, and that was Alan Moore's series, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Now, interestingly enough, both of these series started out and intended to be under the Image umbrella. And of course, in the case of Authority, it actually started, the preview was under Image. However, between the preview under Image and the first issue hit the stands, a thing happened. And that was Jim Lee sold everything he had, the entire Wildstorm studio, to DC Comics. And so by the time the first issue was published for Authority, and the first issue of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, they were now under the DC umbrella. Now, in addition to these iconic pulp characters like Tarzan and Sherlock Holmes, they also could include a lot of comic book characters, a lot of traditional comic book characters. Most notably of them, the Fantastic Four. Now, the Fantastic Four were actually key to the larger arcing story in this book. They were known only as the Four, but there was absolutely no mistaking exactly what and who they were. Now, despite the fact that you've got this overarching theme, the book is very much designed to stand alone. Every issue stands completely by itself. You could pick up any single issue of Planetary, read it, and get a full and satisfying story. Ellis viewed it as 3-minute pop singles, but if you take all those 3-minute pop singles and put them together on an album, you've got a really nice greatest hits collection. Likewise, with this particular story, it functions like a mosaic. Each piece by itself serves as a complete whole. However, when you back away from them and view them on a kind of planetary scale, it forms a larger picture that's just that much more satisfying. And that also meant that each one had its own unique design. The design of the book was unique. The design of the storytelling was unique. The covers were always completely unique and actually fit the book. If the character they were featuring was Tarzan, then it had to look very similar to the old pulps that he would appear in. And in most cases, even the logo was different. Now, a big part of what made this book so impressive was unquestionably the art of John Cassaday. Ellis had the concepts, but Cassaday breathed life into them. They could not have done this on their own. It's like Lennon and McCartney as a team. All of the work went so well. The line work of John Cassaday is absolutely integral to the book. He has a way of making something powerful and yet delicate at the same time. And plus, only John Cassaday can give you giant ants and make them just absolutely amazing. And that's what we got in this book. We got so many concepts that were at the same time completely familiar and yet completely fresh, because they paid so much attention to every detail, which meant the series took a long time to come out. In fact, it ran for 27 complete issues, and it took 10 years to do them all. That's an average of a little over 4 months an issue, but it was well worth it. Now, it was excruciating to fans waiting for the issues to come out at the time, but what we have now is exquisite, because it is an exquisite book that serves as a great whole and belongs in every comic fan's library. So, it belongs on your library too, and that's kind of the point that we're getting to with this one. So how do you go after this book? Well, if you're a collector of back issues, by all means seek them out. They're all worth it. It will form a great little piece of your run, and that's a stunning way to do it. And likewise, you want to go just a little further, because there were 2 specials that take place after the story is concluded that are kind of alternate stories. Planetary teamed up with Batman, and a Planetary Stormwatch. All of them very, very good. But if you just want the meaty part of the story, then there's 2 paperbacks. Between the 2 of them, they collect the entire run. Obviously, volumes 1 and volumes 2. Great works, absolutely belong there. Now, both of them are pretty thick, because it was a good, solidly long story. Or, if you want to just cut right to the chase and get this massive fly swatter of a book, it's available in a complete hardcover omnibus. Now, a lot of the DC hardcovers, not so good, because they're so thick they feel like they're going to fall apart the first time you open them. This one is not that way. This one's only about, I think, 800 pages, so it actually is one of the better omnibuses to get. It's hefty, it's not cheap, but it's really, really good, and you're going to be glad you've got it. Now, you want to go a little further than those? There are some other really good works, and of course, the first one I'm going to recommend is another one of my favorites, Transmetropolitan. This is where Warren Ellis really came into fruition. This is a good good work. You absolutely want to check this one out if you haven't. But if you want something that hews a little closer to what Planetary is as a team, well, he's done several books for Image. All of them are worth reading. I don't think he's done anything that wasn't good, but probably one of the closest is Injection. Good, solid work. Planetary is when you want to go first. That's the classic. But if you want a little more in that vein, this is another really good work. So that's pretty much got us up to date. This is all stuff that belongs in every comic fan's library. Now, since it's been a little while since we've been here, I want to see if you guys still remember the 3 S's. In case you don't, that is like, share, and subscribe, guys. I'm trying to do my part here, maybe a little slower than the past, but this is what you got to do for me. So keep your comments coming. I very much appreciate them. They help me know what to do next. And we will definitely do our part to be back with another installment. So guys, take care of yourself. As always, wash your hands, make good choices, and we'll be back next time. Take care.